All right, so today is Friday, March 20th, and we are going to be covering our unit on deviance and social control all in one day today. We've got a 3-part lecture here, and then I've got a couple of videos for you in the middle. All right, so in terms of our learning outcomes today, students will be able to define and give examples of deviance, and students will be able to apply the social constructionism lens to deviance. And I'm going to try something new, leaving the video on for most of today, today's lecture, just trying something new. All right, so part 1, definitions of deviance and social control. Remember to pause the video anytime you need some time to write down some notes. All right, so first off, what is social deviance? So here's a definition that we can use. Social deviance is any transgression of socially established norms. So remember we talked about norms back in the classroom, in our culture unit, non-material culture, about norms are rules and guidelines for just how we behave. And so deviance is when we break those norms. And deviance is really broad, just like our discussion of norms are really broad, that norms are relative. Well, deviance is relative too. It's relative to the context that you're in. Deviance can be formal, meaning crime. So that's anytime you're breaking one of those established laws. And I would call formal deviance also if you're breaking like a rule of a university or something that's an established policy. Deviance can also be informal, just like those informal norms that we have, like when you're walking on the sidewalk or on the stairs and you kind of stick to the right side, just like we drive on the right side of the road. If you're walking on like the left side of the sidewalk, that's kind of deviant. It's a very informal type of deviance, but you're doing something unusual. And then the important thing here is how sanctions work too, right? That you usually receive, if you break social norms, especially formal ones, you receive some type of negative sanction. And so these types of punishments that you receive will also vary across time and place. Keep in mind that deviance is not being deviant is not a moral judgment. This isn't something like you're bad because you're deviant. No. We are all deviant in some way or another. This has nothing to do with moral judgments, even though it might sound like it does. It is more about those established norms and then if you break them. And so when you think about deviance, think about how the context always matters. It's how the people around you are going to define you as either being deviant or not. And I would say that, according to where you are in history, where you are in the world, your actions in one place would be defined as deviant, in another they would not. So, for example, women in the United States and other places in the world, but particularly, I guess, in the United States, wearing long skirts. Now, I would guess for the most part, most Americans do not wear floor-length skirts all the time. But women do in other parts of the world, and that is still continues to be the norm. And so you always have to think about the context in terms of, when you're trying to figure out if something's deviant or not. I always have students say like, well, is this deviant? Is this deviant? Well, think about the context. How are people responding? And so these are the questions that I would ask. What's the norm that's being broken? How is it broken? And how do people respond? And so are people responding positively or negatively? And we can be doing positive deviance. So that whole pay it forward movement from a few years ago, like you buy someone's coffee from, whoever's in line behind you, that's still a norm violation. It's unusual to pay for a stranger's coffee, but it's usually evaluated really positively. Another thing to think about context, so when I got my nose pierced many, many years ago, it was deviant in the context of my family. So I did it at a time when I wouldn't see my family for a while. I tried to avoid them for a little bit, and then they did have somewhat of a negative response, depending on the person. Whereas with my friends, it they really didn't care. They were more positive about it. Oh, it's so cute. Except for my one friend who years later, she did ask me to take out my nose ring for her wedding. And so I thought that was interesting that like for everyday life, she didn't care if I had a nose piercing. But when it came to her wedding and her wedding pictures, it really mattered. All right, so then how about social control? Social control means the things or people that create or enforce compliance to formal and informal norms. So again, we can think about these as informal or formal. Informal social control means things like neighborhoods and communities. We can think about this as like maybe neighbors, like they keep a watch out, they're always looking out. Like sometimes I would text or call my neighbors if I'm one time I saw a truck at my neighbor's house late at night, so I texted her like, hey, all your lights are off and there's a truck that's out there. And so kind of like keeping watch over the neighborhood. Maybe you think about this as like different adults in the neighborhood watching out for what little kids are doing. Whereas formal social control means state or government agencies that create and enforce laws. So these are going to be folks like the police and CPS. They're really forcing that compliance. So I'm going to try here. There we go. I would draw this on the board if we were in class. So I like to think about, here we are, society. Ooh, that's supposed to be a circle. This is society. Here we are. This is us. Here we are. So in terms of social control, I like to think about social control as this force on the outside, not like on the outskirts of society, but it's keeping us in compliance here. So this is agents of social control here. Agents of social control, keeping you within the boundaries. So let's think about like stealing. You're not supposed to steal stuff, right? And so agents of social control keep us in those boundaries, and they force our compliance. If you get caught stealing something, you get in trouble. Whereas remember last week we talked about socialization. That's as good as we're going to get there. So socialization, I think of it as kind of working at the opposite end. I'll have it pushing against this arrow here. So our agents of socialization teach us about the boundaries. They teach us, what we can do. They teach us how to function. They teach us where the boundaries are. Whereas the agents of social control are kind of like keeping us in those boundaries. So I kind of see them as kind of like opposing forces a little bit. Social control, keeping us in the boundaries. Socialization, teaching us where those boundaries are. All right. Here's a couple examples of informal agents of social control. These are screenshots from my Federal Way Community Watch Facebook page that I'm on, which makes it seem like there's so much crime in Federal Way, which maybe there is. So this is a person posted a picture of their bike stolen from this neighborhood, the Twin Lakes neighborhood. So letting people be aware that there's crime going on, and to keep a lookout for their bike. This one here posted about homeless folks living in a certain area. I found needles, letting people know that this is going on. This one is just it's a shared page. It's really fuzzy, but kind of like a public shaming. This is why you don't park in the striped area of the handicap parking zone, and kind of so using this platform to share why you shouldn't be doing this, kind of shaming this person anonymously who's parked there. And then finally, this one here, this is definitely more direct. Keep an eye out for this guy. He's breaking into cars. I have his face covered up here for the picture. But this idea of, in these Federal Way Community Watch Facebook page, acting as an agent of social control, trying to informal agent of social control in terms of the neighborhood, trying to reinforce the boundaries, ensure that people are following the laws, being safe, and telling people to be on a lookout for this guy. He's gonna harm your property, or whatnot. Call the police if you see him. Call the police if you see my bike. Reinforce these things. The last slide here. I know this lecture's gone on. This part's gone on a little bit longer, but thinking about crime and deviance, are they the same or different? So here's a way that we can visualize this, that they are different, but there is some overlap. And so after this slide, I'm going to link these videos here. A lot of deviance is non-criminal. And so this link here, this first link, is going to be from a group called Improv Everywhere, where they have the annual No Pants subway ride in New York City in December or January. So it's very cold and people take off their pants. It's actually legal. It started as a small prank with 7 guys, and it's grown into this massive event every year. So it's not illegal to wear your underwear in public in New York City. Oh, interesting. Some acts are both deviant and illegal. So we would think about things like murder, stealing, kidnapping. These are things that folks generally find to be deviant in most circumstances and also illegal. And then some crimes are not deviant. So I've got an example here. But we can think about other crimes that are not deviant, such as jaywalking, speeding, throwing away someone's mail. It's actually a felony. Using unsecure free Wi-Fi connections, so like Wi-Fi squatting, stealing time at work. And so this video, this example is from The Office, and talking about being a time thief at work. And so go ahead and watch those examples to think about how a lot of deviance is non-criminal, but some crimes are not deviant. With our conclusion here being that crime and deviance do overlap, but they're totally independent concepts as well. So before you move on to part 2, make sure you watch the 2 videos that are linked in Sakai.